guys, welcome. This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I don't know how this got into my stream, but I saw this and I thought to myself, "Oh man, we got to talk about this. This is too sorry, like this is too good." So yeah, this is the I don't know what it is. It's I saw the title. I was like, what? It's short, relatively speaking. It's the, someone had done, this is called The Dark Side of Science, The Horror of Ape and Child Experiment. And, I just wanted to, is this thing working right? Hello? I don't even know if this is working. Hello? Is it working? Why do I feel like this isn't... There we go. I'm closer to the mic. You know what I may need to do? I may need to go back over here. Nope. Not what I need to do. Over here. No. Go here. Audio. Hello. Mic volume. That's what it needs. Mic volume up. Hello. That's better. Maybe. Maybe not. Hello. Alright. Anyway. I'm making some cookie dough to wash out the flavor of crumble cookies. Oh my gosh, those things are disgusting. Yes, I do mean that. Disgusting. Alright, so let's hit this. This should be fun.
Throughout history, stories of humans being raised by animals have fascinated mankind. The feral children have found their way into human culture throughout the ages, from Tarzan all the way back to Romulus and Remus suckling from the she-wolf. Infants seemingly offer a blank slate upon which language, culture, nationality and morality are inscribed throughout their development. Because of this, child development is a miracle of learning, and as such, it has not only fascinated the likes of Rudyard Kipling, but also that of scientists.
Oh, yeah, Reginald Pittman. Yeah,
and one such scientist would devise an experiment, but instead of putting a child into the wild to be raised by animals, turn the tables and take one of our closest relatives of the animal kingdom and raise it as a human. Today we're looking at the ape and the child experiment. Welcome to the dark side of science.
I don't know what this channel is. I've never heard it before. But man,
our story starts on the Abreu colony in Cuba in 1930 with the birth of a female chimpanzee on the 15th of November.
Cuba.
The baby chimp and her mother and father were donated to the Yerkes National Primate Research Center not long after her birth. The research center was headed by eugenicist Robert Yerkes and was used for medical research into comparative psychology. The baby chimpanzee was given the name Gua, and in June 1931 she was forcibly removed from her mother's cage and was sent off to a new home at the age of 7.5 months for a comparative experiment. Her new family was scientists Luella and Winthrop Kellogg and their 10-month-old son Donald. But before we carry on, here's some background information to the Kelloggs and why this young chimp became a resident in their house. Winthrop and Luella had married in 1920. The couple had met in Indiana University while studying. Winthrop was involved in a very diverse set of research subjects, but throughout the 1920s focused on conditioning and learning. He was fascinated with relative influence of nature and nurture on behaviour, and if you could isolate the nurture element. What if you could raise an animal, a primate for example, in the exact same way as you would an infant? Would the chimpanzee's development change, or maybe would it even begin to act like a human? He had been planning the concept of a comparative experiment during his postgraduate days at Columbia, when studying for his master's in 1927. Kellogg during this time was fascinated with accounts of feral children living with wolves. He believed
Feral children were
that
those
the
wolves.
infants learned to live like wolves because that was what their environment demanded of them. Thus, if the tables were turned with a wild animal could nurture overall heredity and even humanize it, the birth of Kellogg's first child offered a unique opportunity, and that was to comparatively raise the child alongside a primate. Kellogg devised if he could raise a chimp with Donald, their son, like siblings, he could then see the nature differences. The chimpanzee
How
wouldn't be a
freaky.
pet, but treated in the exact same way as the human child.
Yeah, the chimpanzee.
They would be fed by bottle, bathed, clothed, handled, and pushed around in a pram. It would be induced to walk upright, the same as a child, and would be corrected in its mistakes, like a human as well. The chimpanzee would also be taught and encouraged to eat with a spoon and to play like a child with children's toys. The primates would not be allowed to learn in any other way than the human way, thus allowing the experiment a chance to succeed in creating a human acting chimp. In order to facilitate his experiment, Kellogg would seek help from Yerkes. He received the Social Science Research Council Fellowship to work at the Yale Amphipod Station in Florida in order to prepare for his experiment in 1931. Needless to say, this would necessitate the Kellogg's family moving to Florida, and not long after, Goa the chimpanzee would join the family to start this bizarre experiment. Goa and Donald were introduced at the ages of 7.5 and 10 months respectively in the summer of 1931.
So like 7.5
And in every conceivable way,
years.
the two were treated by Winthrop and Luella as if they were brother and sister. Straight away, the Kellogg's started noting the physical and behavioural differences between the two infants. The former was pretty easy, as the two were different species of animals, and with Goa having longer arms than Donald and much greater physical abilities.
Yeah.
Goa had nearly all of her teeth, whereas Donald only had 2. To discover the differences, both physiologically and psychologically, of the two, Kellogg thought up some strange and somewhat cruel experiment. Kellogg took great interest in the differences in how the two's bone structures developed.
Oh gosh.
To explore this, he tested the differences by sound, by hitting both Donald and Goa's head with a spoon, to try and hear a difference in the hardening of the skull. He found that Donald's head radiated a dull thud, whereas Goa's made a harsher sound, hinting at the chimpanzee's bones being more hardened. Bizarrely, Kellogg had previously x-rayed Goa and already knew her bone density was equal to that of a 2-year-old human. To ascertain the differences between the two's reaction times, the Kellogg's devised an interesting experiment. Both Donald and the chimpanzee were placed in front of a motion picture camera. This was to allow reviewing of the reactions later on. After the two had settled and the camera was recording, a revolver was fired in the air behind them.
Holy cow!
Both were startled, and it was discovered that Goa reacted more quickly than her human sibling. The experiment was repeated a few months later with 5 other children, ranging in age between 17 months and 8.5 years.
Not expecting it.
The basic day for the 2 test subjects consisted of a 7 a.m. wake-up with 7:30 a.m. breakfast. Then until 8:30 a.m, sit with the adults at the breakfast table. From 9 in the morning until lunch, the time would be filled out with controlled observations, car rides, outdoor and indoor play, photographing, and various experiments. After lunch, at 12:15, nap time followed by a bath time. And between 15:30 and 1600, more experiments, observations, playtime, and tests. To end up the day at dinner at around 1800 hours, followed by bed at 18:30. The days were not always run strictly to this plan, as the Kellogg's had various different engagements.
6:30 at night?
During the experiment's initial 2 weeks, Goa's reflex behaviour was recorded. An interesting behaviour was noted. The chimpanzee had issues in her balance after standing upright. There were 2 conclusions that the Kellogg's family made about this. The first being due to her still not being fully developed. But the other conclusion was that she was becoming disorientated due to having to look up at her human observers more than if she was in the wild. Probably a bit of both, as this new environment would definitely have been confusing to her. Goa adapted very quickly to her new sleeping arrangements. A cot was constructed and was designed to be usable for an infant child with mattress, clean linens, and even night clothing. When this was temporarily removed, her reaction was predictable. She began to cry, out in despair. Guar's reactions when sleepy were very characteristic of a human child. When picked up, she would try and cuddle up, and when sat up, her head would nod down, only to come back up startled by an emotion. For the first 2 months, Guar napped more than Donald, mainly after meals, but as she got older, she slept less in the day, eventually getting to the 1 nap as outlined in the day schedule.
Yeah.
Donald, on the other hand, was sleeping 2 or more hours in the afternoon nap time. Guar slept during the night without issues throughout the experiment, something that from experience isn't something that a human child often does. But as the experiment progressed, she started to make a nest with her bedding, a thing that chimpanzees do in the wild with twigs in trees. She hadn't seen anyone else do this, and thus showed the behaviour was possibly hereditary, or could be perceived as an infant playing in their bed in the night. Throughout the experiment, both subjects were observed during their physical development. Donald had a walking age stroller. This was because human infants don't develop walking until at least 10 months. Guar, on the other hand, could walk by the time she was with the Kellogg's. She also had a stroller, but she used it as a toy instead of a walking aid. Interestingly, Guar was beginning to mimic the way humans walk, adopting a more upright posture. The chimp was showing much quicker level of development as Donald for the age. The experiment continued to observe the differences between the two in the way they interacted with their environment. During the toddler months of childhood, the beginnings of reading and language start to develop. Part of this is the ability to point at things that interest the infant, and Guar exhibited these behaviours as well. The 2 infants, almost right from the start of the experiment, seemed to enjoy each other's company, with Donald showing great delight in interacting with his new sister. Guar would hold out hands to Donald, stroking her hair. As the experiment progressed, it seemed like the 2, especially Guar, had become attached to each other, always making a beeline for him when he entered the room, and noticeably got more excited when playing with Donald. If Guar was admonished for doing something wrong, Donald would go up to her and hug the chimpanzee. As Donald's speech developed, he was able to even say his sister's name.
Guar.
When another older child called Martha was introduced, Guar behaved similarly by hugging the 3.5-year-old, smelling her hair and holding her hand. Interestingly, Guar was much more reserved and timid around human adults, which to me sounds very similar to how a human child may act, loud and excited with their peers, but quiet and shy around adults. Guar's actions around new adults was even more shy and even at some times seemed fearful. The pair's interactions with other animals was characteristically childlike as well, with Guar stroking the next door neighbour's cat and having seemingly no fear in approaching adult dogs, much like a human child. But this would change at the age of 11 months, when a puppy barked at her after she had mistakenly taken the dog running as a game of tag. From then on, she became scared of almost all other animals, including chickens, cats, and even birds in the trees.
They're trying to eat her.
Guar's emotional responses to being admonished or punished for any number of minor behavioural infractions elicited an interesting response. She would noticeably become distressed, and then approach the experimenters for affection or a kiss, as a form of forgiveness for committing the faux pas.
My dog does
this
the same
is a similar
thing.
type of behaviour seen in children, that comes on later in social development at around 18 to 24 months. Because they don't age
at the same time, dummies.
This showed that Guar was developing faster emotionally than Donald, and that she was learning very human-like behaviours. She had mastered opening doors, especially a swinging door, a month before Donald. At the age of 1 year, Guar had figured out that light switches controlled the electric light bulbs. As such, when an adult put their hand up to the switch, Guar would look at the light in anticipation of its illumination. The experimenters attempted to teach both how to play patty cake. Donald picked it up rather quickly and with little prompts happily followed the game. Guar, on the other hand, never learned how to play properly, even though she was given daily opportunities to practice. The 2 subjects also underwent potty training. Guar had more accidents than Donald and was seemingly embarrassed when she made them. Eventually she would indicate that she wanted to go to the toilet by oohing and holding her genital area. This would develop to her going to an experimenter and indicating by tugging on the adult's trousers. Throughout the experiment, both of the subjects were given the opportunity to use a spoon. Like many other observations, the Kellogg's saw that Guar was way ahead in proficiency than Donald. By 13 months, she was
Donald's
using the
funny
spoon for
looking.
self-feeding
Look at that face.
with little mess, in contrast to Donald, who had mastered the skill by around 18 months. Another test was devised where a reward was placed behind a wire mesh
jeez.
attached to a door frame. The only way to get to the reward is via the use of a hoe to drag it under a small gap in the mesh.
Hoes
Although
always
both
bring
figured
a
out the
reward,
solution
but
at around
sometimes you
100
don't want
attempts,
the reward.
Guar proved to be more consistent in her success rate.
Sometimes you got that reward.
The Kellogg's
till
wanted to
for
probe
the next
into a
18
vital
years.
part of the human experience next, and that was something that makes us unique: language. For this part
Oh, you mean
is
the
where
monkey didn't
Guar
start
would fall
talking?
behind, and Donald would develop some strange new behaviours. Guar's language development differed to that of a human child,
Oh, no
in the
way.
sense that she would communicate her wants physically, like pointing to her mouth for food. As we saw with
That
her
seems like a
potty
pretty smart
training,
monkey to
the
me.
need to empty her bowels was indicated non-verbally. This was the same for when she wanted to play, by grabbing one or both hands of her intended playmate. She would also pull experimenter's hands to items she needed help with. The vocal communication Guar achieved was limited to oohs, ahs, and grunts. This is where Donald exceeded, as almost from the start of the experiment he was attempting to vocalise his emotions and needs. This would develop into vocalising actual words, a feat Guar failed to reach. But something rather worrying began to become apparent in Donald, in that his speech became stunted. This is likely due to his lack of socialising outside the experimental setting, and as such, failed to pick up words discovered by interaction of one's peers. He was only in possession of around 6 words, but he did show signs of vocal imitation, although not from his human carers, but instead from his chimpanzee sister. The Kellogg's noticed Donald barking like a dog to communicate certain emotions. The child would also screech, scream, and even ooh like an ape. Guar, although not learning to speak words herself, did learn the words spoken to her. Initially, she would react just to the tone of the way the words were spoken, but she began to show signs of being able to differentiate between different commands. Initially, she would react to no and kiss, but her word reaction vocabulary eventually expanded to around 95 words, including the ability to point out parts of her anatomy when asked.
Oh my gosh,
Donald,
you wasted
from the
words.
start of the experiment, was slow to learn commands, but this is probably attributable to his lower mobility compared to Guar. Once he was more proficient with climbing and walking, he would overtake his sister.
It's a
Donald's
monkey, it's
apparent
not his
social
sister.
and vocal issues caused concern by the 9th month of the experiment in Luella, and as such, the experiment was abruptly brought to an end.
Oh.
Guar was evicted from a human household and sent back to Robert Yerkes on the 28th of March 1932. From there, she would be the subject of a number of other experiments conducted by Robert's wife, Ada.
She tried to eat.
But what of all the data collected from the study? And what was the result of the 9-month ape and baby experiment? Well, the Kellogg's, now back to being a conventional family, moved back to Indiana, and the couple set about writing a book and publishing their study. Winthrop's results showed that he was disappointed that Guar had hit a wall of development. He had generally hoped that immersing the ape into the human household would have created the reverse of a wild raised by wolves child.
Oh.
It's undeniable that Guar did develop many human-like behaviours, such as walking more upright, being relatively potty trained, understanding a multitude of commands, and even showing off her problem-solving skills.
Potty trained
Ultimately,
throw its
Guar
poop
was
at
limited
you.
by the fact that she was a chimpanzee, and that her heredity limited her ultimate ability of language. Essentially, nurture can only take you so far until nature catches up. Initially, the experiment went public when the article was published in the American Psychological Journal. It was written in such a way as to appeal to as many people as possible. This, unsurprisingly, generated a lot of interest in the press at the time. And by the time a full book was released in 1933, the study and its ease of accessibility resulted in polarising opinions. Many critics pointed out that Guar being pulled from her biological mother at such a young age, and the suddenness of the ending of her adoption. This, no doubt, must have been very traumatic for the young chimp, being ripped twice from her perceived home. But the biggest criticism came from the use of Donald as a test subject. Understandable, after all, it was on Luella's insistence that the study be terminated.
I mean, look, they're trying
The
to make the
extended
kid throw
period of
up
9
right
months
now.
in which Donald was used in the experiment
tied to a
resulted
chair
in his
crying.
development being stunted. And needless to say, this brings up questions of the study being ethical. especially when feasibly a child wasn't even needed for Gua to be raised with humans.
That's true.
A number of the tests throughout the study were questionable, where the child was frustrated in a broom experiment, hit on the head, and startled with the gun. But how did the subjects fare later on in life? Well, unfortunately, both participants' lives would end in tragedy.
Oh.
Gua would die of pneumonia on December 21st, 1933, less than a year after she left the Kellogg's family and just after turning 3 years old. Donald would live to the age of 43 when, in 1973, he took his own life. In all respects, he had grown up healthy, studying medicine and specialising in psychiatry. Whether his upbringing had contributed to his demise, we will never know.
Oh, I can
Llewellyn
tell you.
and Winthrop would pass away in 1972. Now, where would you rate this experiment on my ethical scale?
Yeah,
I'm going to give it about a 5
died.
or a 6.
That is a crazy
This video is a Plain Difficult production.
thing.
All videos on the channel are Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike licensed. Plain Difficult videos are produced by me, John, in a currently bright and sunny corner of southeast London, UK.
Where do you get the stupid thing?
I have Twitter if you fancy checking me out
Yeah,
to
that's
see
cool
hints
stuff,
and
man.
things on future videos. I've also got
all I
Patreon
do
and
is
YouTube
subscribe.
membership as well. So check that out if you
That's
fancy
really
supporting the
cool,
channel
man.
financially.
This guy's got a good
And all that's left to say
deal
is thank
here.
you for watching.
So anyway, I enjoyed that. I hope you all did too. It's weird, man. It's weird, the whole eugenics deal. I see why they don't accept it anymore, but you have to always remember, eugenics was accepted science. Okay? So trust the science of eugenics. That doesn't sound right, does it? Yeah, trust nothing. Question everything. Always ask why. And guys, until next time, I love y'all. Thanks for coming by. Thanks for those that will be checking this out later. And as always, Godspeed, everyone. Oh, wait a second. You know, I'm not even on the right thing to turn this off. I can't figure out how to end a stream. So anyway, Godspeed, everyone. And peace.